Hello everyone, thanks for being here. In today's video, we're going to draw a river landscape scene using a reference photo, and we will be coloring it with Ohuhu Kaala series markers. This time, the overall color theme will be a little darker than what I usually go for. I know some of you mentioned that you don't have a wide range of very light marker shades, so in this video, I will share some tips on how to create a landscape drawing using a limited color palette. For those who are new here, welcome. You can find many free downloadable worksheets to help you improve your drawing on my website at imianart.com, along with my full art supply list. For this video, I've posted a detailed worksheet on my Patreon with a step-by-step breakdown and organized tips, plus a real-time video without voiceover if you would like to follow along at your own pace. Consider joining my Patreon if you would like to support my channel and get access to more content. Before we start drawing, I want to quickly talk about the Ohuhu Kaala series markers, which have a different chisel nib compared to the Ohuhu Honolulu series. I will do a short comparison between the two, so you know what to expect when choosing your markers. A big thank you to Ohuhu for sponsoring today's video. Ohuhu is currently having their Black Friday sale until December 1st. Feel free to check more detail on their website. I've used the color series before, but this 108 color set is brand new. All color sets come with a sturdy carrying box. Even though I usually store my markers in a different container, I love reusing the box to organize my other pens and tools. The color cards are a little different from the previous version. Now they are bound with a metal ring, which make it super easy to flip through the pages. In the 108 color set, the color boxes on the card are very small. It's much faster and easier to fill them. However, with the smaller swatches, it can be a bit harder to compare and pick colors side by side. You can pause the video here if you'd like, take a closer look at the color cards and see if these shades suit your needs. Overall, this big set offers a great variety of colors. Though for my personal use, I do wish there were a few more light green shades. Now, the main difference between the Kaala series and the Honolulu series is the chisel tip. The Kaala chisel tip is slightly longer than the standard one, but the width is actually the same. On the other side of the marker, the Kaala series only includes a bullet nib, not a brush nib, which is totally fine for me since most of the time I only use a chisel tip to draw. From the side view, you can see the nib is a bit slimmer. Overall, the Kaala marker's body is flatter, which I actually found more comfortable to hold, especially when drawing at certain angles. Here I'm showing some basic strokes to compare the two nibs. They can both create similar types of lines, but one noticeable difference is that the Kaala chisel tip performs better for small details and thin lines because the nib is narrower. It gives you a little more control when you're working on finer areas. As for the nib softness, I honestly don't feel much of a difference between the two. When it comes to actually using the marker, I personally prefer the Kaala series a little more than the Honolulu. They are more comfortable to hold, and the chisel nib makes it easier to draw small details. But I don't have a strong preference. Both series works really well for me. However, the color set is missing some light green tones, which happen to be the colors I use the most. So if you are trying to decide which set to get, I would recommend thinking about which colors from different sets best suit your needs first. The difference in nibs is quite small. In my experience, choosing the right colors matters much more. This set doesn't include the light greens I usually use, but I will show you how I adapt and still make it work for a landscape scene. Let's talk about that as we go through the drawing together. For this piece, I will be using a reference photo taken by my friend. It has a nice composition with a great balance between the river and the surrounding trees. When we draw from a photo, it doesn't mean we have to copy everything exactly. Feel free to adjust and simplify elements. First, I'm going to draw a rectangle to set up my canvas area. Then I'm sketching a rule of third grid to help me plan the layout. I want to place the main subject near one of the grid intersections. I will make the horizon line sit just on the bottom third line, and the focal point will be around the lower right intersection. Placing our key elements around these points is a simple way to build a strong composition. Of course, we don't have to follow these rules every single time, but it's a really practical guideline for beginners. The river itself follows a S-curve composition, which helps create a nice sense of depth in the scene. I'm also adding 3 main rocks arranged in a triangle composition. When sketching trees, I always start by drawing circles to plan their placement and decide how many clusters I want to draw. It really helps to organize the layout before going into detail. This is a technique I use all the time. For the background, I decided to replace the close-up hills with distant mountains instead. In my first draft, I actually drew the hill, but it added a complexity and made the piece take longer to finish. So this time I wanted to keep things simpler and focus more on the foreground. Now we can lightly erase the pencil outlines, just enough so you can still see the main shapes. I'm gonna start coloring the grass and the rocks in the foreground. I like to begin by laying down a light base layer of shadow to establish the direction of the light source. This helps set the tone for the rest of the drawing. At the very beginning, the grass might look a bit random and not very good. That's totally normal. The colors are quite saturated, and this set doesn't have many lighter or more muted tones. So we're going to work with what we have. I know a lot of you run into this issue when you first start using markers. The colors can feel too dark or too intense. It's kind of hard to find a single set that has every shade you need. I usually recommend getting a set of around 70 colors, and then adding a few individual markers to fill in the gaps. Of course, if your budget allows, you can always go for a bigger set. The main goal of this drawing is to show you how to make the most out of the colors you already have. Even if they are not your favorite, you may still create nice results. When drawing trees, I normally wouldn't start with such a dark green, so this drawing was definitely out of my comfort zone. I actually struggled with it in the first couple of drafts. Here I'm focusing on blending the greens unevenly to create patches of color for each cluster of the tree. The key is to pay attention to the overall silhouette of the tree groups. In the reference photo, we cannot really see the clear shapes of the tree cluster, so we'll need to simplify them on our own. I've explained how to draw trees in more detail, step by step, in my other YouTube videos. Feel free to take a look if you would like to learn more. Try not to press too hard with the marker. Later we'll use the same color to add more layers to deepen the color. For the river, this marker set does include a nice, more muted blue, which works really well. But if you don't have a similar color, don't worry, you can totally use a brighter blue instead, which is what most marker sets come with. In my first draft, I actually used a bright blue, and it works very well too. To color the river, I used gentle horizontal strokes, leaving some white areas to represent reflections. In the past, I might have gone for a looser, bolder style when drawing water. But for this piece, I wanted to keep things clean and simple. I chose not to use loose and bold strokes here, since they might add too much movement and make the drawing feel crowded against the intense green colors. I move my hand back and forth in a steady motion, so the marker doesn't leave a mark at the end of each stroke. Now moving on to the background. Ideally, I would use cooler and less saturated color to create a stronger sense of atmosphere perspective, where distant objects appear lighter and softer. But since the set doesn't include many lighter or muted tones, we will just reuse some of the same colors we used earlier for the trees and the grass. I'm using the corner of the marker tip to create nice irregular silhouette that clearly show the shapes of the shrubs and background trees. Even though we don't have many green shades, I want to add a bit more color variation to make the background more interesting. So I'm including a few autumn colored trees to bring in some warmth and contrast. For the mountains, I will keep them simple, just a large triangular shape shaded with a couple of gray colors. Next, let's add the sky. There are many ways to draw a sky, but I don't want it to stand out too much or compete with other elements. So I'm using the same blue color we used for the water, applying it lightly to create some subtle patches. At this point, you can see everything taking shape. We have established the main composition, added our base layers of color, and created clear forms. Once the ink has dried, we can start adding shadows and depths. The green areas should be mostly dry now, so I will use the same green marker to add another layer and deepen the darker areas. In the reference photo, the rocks have a lot of fine cracks and details. But for this piece, I'm keeping things simple. Just a few light-colored oval-shaped rocks. Since our trees already has a rich color, I want the foreground rocks to stay light to help balance the overall color. I'm only adding minimal shadows and textures here. Now I'm moving back to the water and use the same blue to add another layer, just to strengthen the color and make reflection feel more natural. By now, the paper has already absorbed a good amount of ink. If we keep layering the same shades, it's not really going to get any darker. So let's switch to lightly darker color to add shadows. Be very gentle here. A small amount of darker color goes a long way. In the background, we can also use a darker green to draw additional trees and add more layers. This helps create the impression of a full forest instead of just a single row of trees. Drawing tiny details can be a bit tricky, but the color series markers are quite easy to use in small details. I feel that a straight riverbank looks a bit plain, so I'm adding a small patch of grass to break up the line to give it a bit more depth. For the orange colored trees, I will also use a darker shade to add some layering and depth. Lots of time I will make the background look simple and faded away. But since this drawing doesn't have too much happening in the foreground, I decided to include a little more details in the background to make the overall drawing feel richer. The sky with only one color can feel a bit flat, but this marker set doesn't include a blue that's just one shade darker, and it doesn't have a light purple either. So I decided to use a medium shade of purple to add some color variation to the sky. Just a few strokes made a big difference, since it's much darker than the base layer of blue. Now we can move on to the water and add some reflections. You don't necessarily need to use the exact same color from the trees for their reflections. Mixing in a few different colors can make it look more interesting. We can just draw a few horizontal short strokes to represent the reflection. They add a nice sense of volume and dimension. When I use very dark green or blue for shadows, I keep my strokes small. Even a little bit deep color can really help your objects feel more grounded and three-dimensional. At this stage, everything is already coming together nicely. The overall drawing has clean shapes and clean sections, and the marker strokes are minimal, but still just add enough texture. Even though the overall colors are quite bright, the drawing actually feels very calm and soothing. The foreground could use a bit more details to draw attention, so I added some line work to define shapes and give them more character. Of course, line work is completely optional. If you prefer a cleaner look, you can skip the line work and just keep building up more layers of color using marker to define shadows and edges. Lastly, I always like to use a bit of white paint to add highlights and tweak small details. In the background, I've also added a few dark blue trees. This is quite important Using cooler tones helps the background fade away a little more, and even a small amount of color makes a big difference. I'm really happy with how this drawing turned out. When I first started, I honestly struggled quite a bit. I kept thinking the colors were the problem because I wasn't used to them. But stepping out of my comfort zone turned out to be such a rewarding experience. So to wrap things up, if most of your markers are medium to dark shade and you don't want to buy new colors but still want to draw landscape scenes, here is one of the tips I can recommend. Focus on getting the composition and the forms right first. When you use darker shades, keep your blending and the strokes clean and consistent. Experiment with different color combinations and styles. Dark colors can actually be your best friend. They create beautiful contrast and help your artwork feel more grounded and full of depth. It takes a lot of practice to get things just right. Sometimes if you only have very dark colors and not enough shades, it simply won't work. When you are working with just a few colors, another approach is to make your line work as detailed as possible, and then use just a few colors to add accent. If you want your landscape drawing to have soft lighting and look closer to the reference photo in a more realistic style, you will definitely need a wide range of different shades of markers. So it really depends on your goal and the styles you are trying to achieve. But when you only have a limited color palette, focus on simplifying the overall lighting and the shadow. Stick to the basic principles. The style might not be realistic, but your drawing can still turn out nicely. Using the reference photo to guide your shadows and the forms. But don't stress about matching the exact colors. Just make the most of what you have. And remember, if you would like to see the real-time video and getting a downloadable step-by-step worksheet with all the notes, consider joining my Patreon. If you have any questions or just want to say hi, feel free to leave a comment. Thank you so much for your support. I will see you in the next video.